The child stands where the land ends, toes pressed into wet sand, watching the dark water breathe. It looks almost still from above, but the surface is lying. Beneath it, the ground vanishes. Light breaks apart, shapes dissolve, a branch, a fish, a crocodile's eye, a shadow of nothing at all can become the same thing in that wavering world. For early humans, deep water is not just another landscape. It is the first place where the body's confidence fails. The shore offers food, but it also offers warning. Shellfish cling to rocks. Birds gather where fish are trapped in shallows. Reeds bend over muddy banks where tracks collect like messages. Yet only a few steps farther, the familiar rules collapse. Feet lose the earth, breath becomes limited, sound changes, vision blurs. The hunter who can read hoofprints in dust and smell rain on dry grass suddenly becomes clumsy, slow, half-blind, and dependent on air that cannot be found below the surface. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The fear begins there, not in imagination, but in the body. Early humans are remarkable walkers, runners, climbers, throwers, tool makers, and watchers of distant movement. They are not creatures of deep water. They can wade, swim, gather, and cross when forced or skilled enough. But the human body carries no gills, no fins, no natural armour, no instinctive ease in darkness below. In deep water, even strength can become useless. Panic wastes breath. Cold steals movement. A current stronger than a person does not need teeth. What survives in the record suggests that ancient people were drawn again and again to water's edge. This is not surprising. Rivers and coasts are generous places. They concentrate animals, plants, fish, fresh water, stone, clay, and travel routes. Many prehistoric sites appear near ancient lakeshores, river terraces, springs, and coastlines. The rising seas have swallowed much of the oldest evidence. Water feeds human life, and because of that, humans could never simply avoid it. They had to negotiate with it. But negotiation is not comfort. A savanna predator can be seen approaching. A storm can be smelled. A cliff announces itself with a drop. Deep water is different. Its danger often hides until the body is already inside it. The smooth surface gives almost no clue about depth, current, cold, mud, weeds, submerged branches, sudden holes, or animals waiting below. The evidence remains incomplete, because fear does not fossilize easily, but the pattern is hard to miss. Humans gathered at edges, used water carefully, and slowly learned how to cross what must once have seemed like a living boundary. Imagine a small group moving through an Ice Age landscape. The air is colder than ours in many regions, but the world is not empty. Mammoths and horses graze in open country. Forests shift with the climate. Rivers braid across wide gravel beds. Lakes expand and shrink. Seasonal floods remake familiar ground. A place that is safe in the dry months can become a brown, roaring wall after rain or meltwater. Children learn which banks crumble, which pools are forbidden, which crossing stones can be trusted, and which quiet bends belong to animals. No single explanation fully accounts for why deep water became so powerful in human fear. Part of it is practical. Drowning is fast, silent, and difficult to reverse without knowledge. Part of it is sensory. Humans depend heavily on sight, and underwater sight is poor even in clear conditions. In muddy rivers, it disappears almost entirely. Part of it is evolutionary memory, not in the sense of a perfect inherited story, but in the simple fact that creatures who treated unseen depth casually were less likely to survive. Caution near water is not weakness, it is good engineering. There is also the terrifying unfairness of water. On land, early humans can cooperate with astonishing skill. They can shout, gesture, surround prey, carry children, share tools, and defend one another. In deep water, rescue becomes dangerous to the rescuer. A drowning person grabs, pulls, panics, and sinks. A group that can drive off a leopard may be helpless before a current. The social body, so powerful on land, breaks apart at the surface. Each person's lungs become a private clock. Scholars still debate how far back regular swimming, diving, rafting, and seafaring behaviours extend in different human populations. Some evidence hints that archaic humans and early modern humans crossed water earlier than once assumed, reaching islands, exploiting marine foods, and moving along coasts. Yet that makes the fear more interesting, not less. Humans did not master water because they were fearless. They approached it because hunger, curiosity, pressure. An opportunity kept pulling them back. The first deep water terror is therefore not a simple phobia. It is a relationship. Water is provider and thief, pathway and wall, mirror and grave. It reflects the sky while concealing a world the human body cannot command. It can carry a raft to new land or roll a body into reeds days later. It can preserve footprints in mud, then erase an entire shoreline beneath a rising sea. Long before written myths describe flood, abyss, serpent, or drowned kingdom, people likely know the emotional outline of those stories in their bones. A person walks in and does not return. A child slips below a riverbank. A hunter crossing a channel vanishes without blood, without tracks, without the usual signs that allow grief to understand what happened. On land, death often leaves evidence. Deep water keeps its secrets. That secrecy may be the oldest part of the fear. Early humans lived by reading the world, but deep water refuses to be read. Its surface is a skin over uncertainty. And at that edge, where the known world turns dark and unstable, human beings begin one of their longest negotiations with nature, how to live beside what they cannot fully see, how to use what can destroy them, and how to carry fear without letting it become a prison. The fear at the shoreline becomes clearer when the human body is considered honestly, not as a symbol of intelligence or dominance, but as a warm, breathing animal built for land. On open ground, even a small human group has extraordinary advantages. Eyes face forward and scan distance. Hands can carry infants, stone tools, firewood, and meat. Legs can walk for hours across uneven terrain. Sweat cools the body during long pursuit, the spine, hips, knees. And feet all belong to a creature shaped by gravity, air, and solid ground. But deep water takes those strengths and turns them strange. A person entering deep water loses the one thing every land animal trusts without noticing support from below. The foot reaches down and finds nothing. The body tilts. The head must be kept above the surface by effort. Arms that can throw a spear or shape a blade become crude paddles. Legs that can cross a valley become inefficient levers in a dense moving medium. The human body can swim, but it does not move through water with the effortless authority of a seal, otter, crocodile, or fish. It survives there by technique, practice, and calm is exactly what deep water often removes. Breath is the centre of the terror. On land, air is so constant that it becomes invisible. Underwater, every moment is measured. The chest tightens. The body demands return. Even trained divers feel the ancient command rising from the blood as carbon dioxide builds. For early humans, without formal instruction, without rescue knowledge, and without generations of specialised swimming culture in every environment, this limit must have felt absolute. A person might be strong, clever, and brave. Yet none of that creates air beneath the surface. Vision fails almost as quickly. Human eyes are designed to focus in air, underwater, without a protective airspace. The world blurs. Even clear water bends light and distorts distance. Muddy water reduces everything to brown thickness. A submerged stone may be closer than it appears. A branch can look like an animal. A real animal can look like a branch. In shallow pools, this is inconvenient. In deep water, it becomes dangerous. The same visual intelligence that lets humans read tracks. Gestures, stars, and animal movement becomes unreliable at the very moment when accuracy matters most. Sound also becomes uncanny. Water carries vibration differently from air, and to a submerged human ear, direction becomes difficult. A splash behind the body may seem to come from everywhere. The rush of current, the pounding of one's own heartbeat, the muffled pressure around the skull, all of it breaks the ordinary map of attention. On land, danger usually has a location. In deep water, danger can feel surrounding, formless, and immediate. The skin, too, receives a different world. Cold water strips heat far faster than cold air. A river fed by snowmelt or a shaded lake can disable muscles before a person understands how much strength has been lost. Warm water brings its own hazards: parasites, infection, mud that grips the feet, weeds that tangle the legs, and banks too slippery to climb. Early humans may not have understood these dangers in scientific terms, but experience is its own kind of science. What survives in behaviour often begins as repeated loss. There is a lesser-known detail in the human relationship with water that complicates the picture. Infants show reflexes that can briefly help them respond to immersion, and humans share with other mammals a diving response that slows the heart and shifts blood flow when the face meets cold water. These traits do not make people aquatic animals, and they should not be exaggerated into unsupported claims about a water-adapted human past. Still, they reveal something subtle. The human body is not completely alien to water. It carries emergency tools, fragments of deeper mammalian inheritance, but they are not enough to make deep water safe. This tension matters. Humans are capable of learning water, but not naturally commanding it. That is why cultural knowledge becomes so important. A child raised beside calm lagoons may learn swimming early. A group living near dangerous rivers may teach strict avoidance. A coastal people may read tides as carefully as inland hunters read hoofprints. Another population may see deep water mostly as a place of death. Scholars still debate how widespread swimming ability was among different ancient communities, because the evidence rarely preserves such everyday skills. Bones may suggest diet, tools may suggest fishing, settlements may suggest proximity, but fear, confidence, and instruction leave thinner traces. Even floating is not obvious without experience. Modern people often assume that bodies naturally understand buoyancy, but panic changes everything. A calm person can float. A frightened person may thrash, inhale water, and sink. Early humans had no written manuals, no lifeguards, no controlled pools in which to learn without consequence. Knowledge had to be earned in real rivers, real lakes, real surf, and the price of error could be final. The shape of the human head adds another quiet vulnerability. The mouth and nose sit close to the surface when floating, easily covered by small waves. A person does not need to be pulled far under to drown. A little water in the wrong moment is enough. Long hair, animal skins, carrying loads, holding tools, protecting a child, or being injured before entering the water would all worsen the danger. The body that seems so adaptable on land becomes fragile when the boundary between breathing and drowning is only a hand's width. And yet, this fragility does not produce simple avoidance. It produces respect, ritual, skill, and sometimes obsession. The very limits of the body make water a test. To enter deep water is to accept a temporary demotion in the order of nature. A human becomes slower than fish, weaker than current, more visible than many predators, and dependent on a thin pocket of air. That experience must have shaped not only practical caution, but imagination. Deep water feels like a place where the world has different laws because, for the human body, it does. So the terror is not irrational. It is anatomical. It begins in lungs, eyes, ears, skin, and feet searching for ground, before deep water becomes myth, spirit, monster, or underworld. It is a physical fact the body knows it has crossed into a place where its oldest talents no longer guarantee survival. The shoreline is therefore not merely a line between land and water, it is a line between competence and uncertainty, between the environment humans can read and the one that reads them poorly in return. The body's weakness in deep water would have been frightening enough on its own, but early humans did not meet water as an empty element. Rivers, lakes, marshes, estuaries, and coasts were crowded worlds. They had their own hunters, their own ambushes, their own rules of silence. On land, a predator usually announces itself through movement, scent, tracks, alarm calls, or the sudden tension of nearby animals. In water, the warning may be nothing more than a ripple too small to understand before it is too late. Crocodilians are among the clearest examples of why ancient people had reason to fear the edge. These animals are not relics of fantasy. They are real, patient, and superbly adapted to the boundary between land and water. Only the eyes and nostrils need to break the surface. The body can remain hidden in mud-coloured water, suspended with almost no visible motion. A person kneeling to drink, washing a tool, gathering plants, or crossing a channel may be close to danger without seeing more than a floating stick. The terror here is not the dramatic chase. It is the stillness before movement. In parts of Africa and Asia where early humans and their relatives lived for immense stretches of time, crocodiles were not rare curiosities, and they occupied rivers and wetlands that also attracted prey animals, birds, and humans. Fossil sites preserve marks on bones that suggest crocodilian feeding in deep prehistory, though scholars still debate how often such animals hunted hominins directly, rather than scavenging bodies already dead. The evidence remains incomplete. But the lesson would not require statistics. One person taken at a bank can educate a whole group for generations. Hippos add another layer that modern imagination often underestimates. They are not sleek predators, but they are powerful, territorial, and dangerous in water. A submerged hippo can be difficult to detect until the surface erupts, in rivers where people need to cross, fish, gather reeds, or collect water. A large animal defending space may be as deadly as a carnivore. Early humans did not need to classify animals according to modern biology. They needed to know which stretches of river allowed approach and which stretches did not. Then there are sharks in coastal waters, especially near river mouths, reefs, and fishing grounds. The idea of ancient humans fearing sharks can easily become exaggerated, because most sharks do not hunt people as preferred prey, and encounters depend heavily on region and behaviour. Still, for small groups gathering shellfish, swimming across channels, or using primitive rafts, a large unseen animal below would represent exactly the kind of danger deep water makes difficult to manage. A fin is visible only when it breaks the surface. A bite arrives from a direction the human body is poorly built to monitor. Large fish, rays, eels, and other aquatic animals may have mattered too, not always as killers, but as sources of injury and shock. A stingray buried in sand, a spiny fish handled carelessly, an eel in a crevice, a sudden strike in murky water. Any of these could transform useful shallows into a place of pain. Infections from wounds would have been a serious threat long before people understood microbes. What begins as a puncture or bite can become fever, swelling, weakness. And death days later? Water does not need a monster to be dangerous. It only needs a small wound in a world without antibiotics. The more surprising danger may have come from animals that people themselves attracted. Fish cleaning scraps, blood from butchery, discarded shells, and repeated visits to the same bank could create patterns. Predators learn patterns. Scavengers learn patterns. A safe place can become less safe because humans use it often. This is a quiet but important point. Early people were not just passive victims of water's creatures. Their own success at exploiting aquatic food may have drawn them deeper into zones where other animals were also feeding. On land, fire offered a powerful defense, even before full control of fire becomes regular in the archaeological record, and certainly after it does. Flames change the night. They repel some animals, extend social time, and create a circle of visibility. But fire does not command deep water. A burning branch at a riverbank has limits. It may illuminate eyes at the surface, but it cannot reveal the submerged body. It cannot stop a current, calm surf, or show what waits in brown depth. At the edge of water, one of humanity's greatest tools loses much of its authority. This may help explain why water predators become so symbolically potent in later cultures. Crocodiles, serpents, dragons, water spirits, and underriver beings often gather around the same emotional shape, something hidden, old, patient, and stronger in its element than humans are in theirs. It would be a mistake to treat later myths as direct fossils of Paleolithic experience. No single explanation fully accounts for these stories, and each culture shapes its own meanings. Yet the basic ingredients are ancient and practical. The bank is useful, the bank is dangerous, the surface hides a watcher. There is also the problem of missing bodies. A land predator may leave tracks, blood, bones, a direction of struggle. A water predator may leave only a splash, a churn of mud, an absence. For a small group, this kind of disappearance has a special horror. It denies explanation, it denies recovery, it turns grief into a place. The river Bend itself becomes the memory. People avoid it, speak of it carefully, teach children its danger, and perhaps turn practical warning into story. What survives in the record suggests that prehistoric humans were careful observers of animal behaviour. They knew when herds approached water, when birds signalled fish, when predators were active, when insects emerged, when floods changed banks. They were not ignorant wanderers trembling at every ripple. Their fear was informed. It came from watching, losing, remembering, and adapting. Deep water was terrifying because it was not random. It was patterned. But its patterns were harder to read than those of land. The predator below sight, then, is more than an animal. It is the whole condition of being unable to see the danger clearly. A crocodile is frightening because it can be almost invisible. A shark is frightening because the attack comes from beneath. A hippo is frightening because the calm surface may conceal enormous mass. Even harmless shapes become frightening in such a world because the cost of being wrong is so high. Early humans learned that water's silence was not emptiness. Sometimes it was waiting. Even where no animal waits beneath the surface, the river itself can behave like a predator. It does not need hunger, intention, or teeth. It only needs movement. For early humans, rivers are among the most important features of the living world, but also among the least stable. A river is a road, a drinking place, a hunting corridor, a boundary, a source of fish, reeds, clay, and stone. Then rain falls far upstream, snow melts in distant hills, a bank collapses, a channel shifts, and the same river becomes a force that erases decisions faster than people can make them. A person standing beside a river sees only the local moment. The water in front of them may be calm while a flood is already travelling toward them from a storm they never witnessed. This is one of the oldest tricks of moving water. Its causes can be far away. A clear sky above the camp does not guarantee safety, in dry landscapes especially. Seasonal channels can transform with shocking speed, filling with brown water, branches, carcasses, foam, and stones, even today. People die in sudden floods because the danger arrives from somewhere else. Early humans had observation and memory, but no weather maps, no gauges, no warnings except the signs they learned to notice. Those signs must have mattered intensely. The smell of wet earth upstream, a change in water colour, unusual debris, animals leaving low ground, a distant rumble, the soft cracking of a soaked bank. All of these could become part of a community's survival knowledge. What survives in the record suggests that ancient people were skilled readers of landscape, but the evidence remains incomplete because such knowledge rarely fossilizes. A stone tool can remain for hundreds of thousands of years. The lesson not to sleep in a certain dry channel leaves no direct trace unless someone ignores it. Rivers also deceive through depth. A crossing that looks manageable may hide a hole scoured by current. A gravel bar may drop suddenly into a channel. A person can walk confidently until the bottom disappears, and the body that was upright a moment before is turned sideways by the flow. Once the feet lift, the river gains control. It presses against the legs, spins the body, drives it into rocks, pulls clothing or hair around branches, and forces water into the mouth when the head rises at the wrong instant. Drowning in a river is often not a quiet sinking. It is collision, disorientation, and theft of breath. Whirlpools and eddies may have seemed especially uncanny. Many are not the vast swallowing spirals of legend, but smaller rotating traps formed by rocks, bends, submerged wood, or conflicting currents. To someone caught in one without training, even a modest circular pool can feel as if the water has hands. The surface moves in one direction, the lower current in another. Foam circles, leaves pause and turn. A body trying to escape directly against the force wastes strength. The river appears alive because its motion is complex in a way the eye struggles to simplify. There is a lesser-known danger at riverbanks themselves: undercut edges. Flow eats away the lower bank while grasses, roots, or crusted soil preserve the appearance of solid ground above. A person steps forward and the bank breaks beneath them. This is not dramatic from a distance, but it is deadly at close range, especially for children, elders, or anyone carrying food, tools, or an infant. Mud can collapse, clay can slide, wet stones can roll. A river does not begin being dangerous only after a person swims. Sometimes it takes them before they intend to enter. Floodplains deepen the problem because they are so attractive. They offer fertile plant growth, animal tracks, fish trapped in receding pools, and open movement through landscapes that might otherwise be difficult. Herds visit them, birds nest around them, raw materials collect along them. Human groups would have returned again and again, building maps of opportunity and risk, but floodplains are built by disturbance. The same force that makes them rich also remakes them. A campsite placed well in one season can be poorly placed in another. A safe path across dry ground can become a channel. A familiar bend can vanish. Over generations, these changes may have shaped memory in ways archaeology can only partly approach. When later human traditions speak of floods that cover known land, of rivers that punish carelessness, of waters that divide worlds, it is tempting to search for one original catastrophe behind every story. Sometimes there may be local memories of real floods. Often the relationship is broader. Flooding is not a single event in human history. It is a recurring lesson. No single explanation fully accounts for how flood memories become myth, but the physical experience behind them is widespread and ancient. For early humans, rivers also created social danger. A group crossing together is vulnerable at the exact moment it is least able to respond. Children must be carried, tools must be kept dry or not lost, meat, skins, embers, and gathered food may need transport. Injured people slow the crossing. A strong swimmer may reach the far bank while others struggle. A sudden rise in water can divide a group permanently. On land, people can scatter and regroup. Across water, separation becomes more serious. A river is not only a hazard to the individual body, it can cut the social body into pieces. Yet rivers could not be avoided. They guided migration, concentrated prey, and supplied fresh water. In many environments, to live without rivers would be to live poorly or not at all. This creates one of the central tensions in early human life. Near deep water, the more valuable a place is, the more often people must risk it. A dangerous river crossing may still be necessary because the animals are on the other side. The stone source lies upstream. Or the dry season has shrunk other waterholes to mud. Fear does not stop movement. It shapes when, where, and how movement happens. The people who survived learned timing. They learned to cross at shallows, at braided stretches in dry seasons, where islands interrupt the current, where animals cross, where stones rise close to the surface. They learned that a river's edge after rain is not the same edge as before rain. They may have used branches as supports, skins as floats, logs as aids, and later rafts or boats where traditions developed. Scholars still debate how early and how widely such techniques spread. But the need for them is obvious. Rivers demanded intelligence because strength alone was unreliable. The terror of rivers, then, is not simply terror of water's depth, it is terror of change. A lake may seem still, a sea may seem immense, but a river is visibly becoming something else every moment. It carries yesterday's rain into today's camp. It steals a bank at night. It turns a path into a barrier and a barrier into a path. To early humans watching its surface, the river must have seemed like a creature made of time, memory, and force, generous enough to feed them, indifferent enough to take them, and always moving toward a place they could not see. Beyond predators, floods, and collapsing banks, deep water carries another kind of danger, one that begins not with impact but with perception. It is the terror of not knowing where the world is. In shallow, clear water, the bottom remains visible. The feet can test sand, gravel, weed, or stone. A person can judge where to step and how far the body may sink. But when water becomes dark, deep, or muddy, the bottom disappears as if the earth itself has been removed. The human mind, so dependent on edges and distances, is left staring into a surface that reflects the sky while hiding everything that matters. This is why murky water can feel more frightening than open air, even when nothing dangerous is present. A cliff shows its drop. A dark cave at least has walls. Deep water denies both. It gives the eye a surface but not a map. For early humans, whose survival depends on reading small details, this refusal must have been profound. Tracks, shadows, broken branches, animal posture, wind direction, the colour of grass. All of these belong to the visible world. In dark water, signs are swallowed. The most skilled observer becomes partly blind. The blackness underwater is not always literal black. It may be green, brown, grey, or silver, thick with silt, algae, tannins, ash, or rotting leaves. In tropical wetlands, water can be stained like tea by vegetation. In glacial rivers, powdered stone turns currents pale and opaque. In flood season, entire channels become moving earth. A hand lowered below the surface can vanish before the wrist. A spear thrust into such water may strike fish, mud, root, or nothing. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is easy to infer that people who lived beside these waters developed careful rules about where children could play, where adults could wade, and which pools were better left untouched. Depth itself creates unease because it removes scale. A dark pool may be only a little deeper than a person, or it may drop far beyond reach. Without a visible bottom, the mind fills the space. This filling is not foolish imagination. It is a survival mechanism. When information is missing, caution supplies possibilities. Something may be below, the mud may grip, the cold may shock, the current may strengthen beneath the calm top layer. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional force of deep water, but uncertainty is central to it. Fear grows in the gap between what is seen and what could be true. There is also the problem of reflection. Still water shows the world above it with uncanny beauty. Clouds, trees, stars, and faces appear on its surface, but reversed and trembling. For people without mirrors of polished metal or glass, water may have offered one of the oldest ways to see the self, yet the same surface that gives back a face can also break it apart with one ripple. It is both image and concealment. Later cultures often treat water as a threshold to spirits, ancestors, or other worlds, and while such meanings cannot simply be projected backward into prehistory, the sensory basis is ancient. Water looks like a boundary between realities because it behaves like one. Underwater darkness also affects time. Holding breath stretches moments. A few seconds below can feel long, Panic makes them longer. A person who slips into a deep pool may experience confusion before understanding what has happened. Which way is up? Whereas the surface light may come from above, but bubbles, silt, and spinning movement can blur orientation. In a river, the body may roll. In surf, waves can tumble a person until sky, sand, and foam become one force, for an observer on shore. The disappearance may last only moments. For the person underwater, it can become a private world of urgency. Modern people often separate fear of drowning from fear of darkness, but in ancient water these fears would have merged. To drown is not merely to lose air, it is to lose the ability to place oneself in space. The body reaches for ground and finds none. It reaches for light and misjudges distance. It opens the mouth at the wrong time. Deep water becomes terrifying because it disorganizes the senses before it ends the breath. A surprising detail is that even skilled aquatic animals can be dangerous partly because they exploit this sensory imbalance. A crocodile does not need to be faster than a human across land if the attack begins where human perception is weakest. Fish do not need to be intelligent in human terms to vanish in 3 dimensions. A predator beneath the surface moves through a volume, while a human at the surface often thinks in a plane. Land teaches left, right, forward, backward. Deep water adds below as a hidden direction. For early humans, night would intensify everything. A familiar riverbank in daylight becomes another place after sunset. Firelight flickers on the surface but does not penetrate far. Stars reflect in dark pools, making depth and sky strangely interchangeable. Animals come to drink, insects gather, reeds move without clear cause. A splash in darkness can carry many meanings, most of them unsafe. It is not difficult to understand how night water could gather stories around itself. Even if those stories are lost, their practical root remains visible. Scholars still debate how to interpret the oldest symbolic behaviour related to water, because archaeology preserves objects more readily than feelings. Shells transported far inland, pigments found in caves, fish remains at ancient sites, and settlement patterns near lakes will show that water mattered deeply. But whether a dark pool was seen as sacred, dangerous, inhabited, cursed, or merely risky is harder to know. What survives in the record suggests behaviour. Meaning must be reconstructed carefully. Still, one thing can be said with confidence. Places that repeatedly threaten life often become places of attention. This attention may have been the beginning of rules. Do not enter after rain. Do not step where the reeds are broken. Do not drink where animals vanish. Do not cross when the moon is gone. Do not swim alone. Do not trust the pool that has no birds. Some rules would be practical. Some may have become symbolic. Over time, the two can become inseparable. A taboo may preserve ecological knowledge long after its original explanation fades. A frightening story may keep children away from a deadly bank better than a calm instruction. The blackness underwater, then, is not emptiness. It is compressed uncertainty. It contains possible animals, sudden depth, hidden branches, cold pockets, mud, current, memory, and imagination. For early humans, it was one of the rare places where looking did not lead to knowing. That alone made it powerful. The human mind evolved to search for patterns, but deep water answers with distortion. It gives movement without cause, sound without direction, reflection without truth, and depth without measure. At the edge of such water, fear becomes a form of intelligence. It slows the foot, it sharpens the eye. It asks the group to remember who was lost and where. It turns a pool from scenery into a question. The terror is not merely that something waits below, it is that the below cannot be fully entered without surrendering the ordinary human command of the world. Deep water keeps its darkness, and early humans learn to live beside that darkness, never entirely trusting it, never entirely leaving it alone. The shoreline is where the fear becomes complicated, because the same place that threatens to take life also offers life in abundance. Coasts are not empty borders, they are restless markets of the natural world, where tides deliver food, storms expose hidden things, birds reveal movement below the surface, and the retreating sea leaves behind pools full of trapped creatures. For early humans, a coast could be a dangerous edge, but it could also be one of the richest landscapes they ever learned to use. A person walking along an ancient shore does not need to chase a gazelle across open ground to find calories. Shellfish cling to rocks, crabs hide beneath stones, seaweed gathers in mats, fish become trapped in tidal pools, seals, turtles, birds, eggs, driftwood, salt, and stranded animals appear according to rhythms that can be learned. Even a dead whale on a beach, rare but immense, could become a temporary feast, a source of fat, bone, sinew, and danger all at once. What survives in the record suggests that humans in many regions exploited coastal and aquatic foods far back in prehistory. Although rising seas have drowned many of the oldest shorelines where the evidence would once have been, that loss matters. During the Ice Age, when so much water was locked in glaciers, sea levels were far lower than they are today. Coastlines lay many kilometres, sometimes more than 100 kilometres, beyond the present shore, places where people gathered shellfish, watched tides, crossed channels, camped near estuaries, or learned the moods of surf are now submerged. The sea did not merely hide evidence, it took away entire landscapes of human experience. Scholars still debate how central coastal routes were in the spread of early modern humans, partly because so much of the relevant world now lies underwater. Still, The surviving traces are suggestive. Shell middens, fish bones, marine shells, coastal caves, and stone tools near ancient shorelines show that people did not simply fear the sea and turn away. They returned again and again. They learned which shells could be opened, which tides exposed reefs, which pools were safe, which seasons brought fish or birds, and which storms made the beach deadly. This was not passive scavenging. It required memory, timing, and sometimes considerable courage. The coast is dangerous because it changes on a schedule that is easy to misread. A rock platform exposed at low tide can become an island as the water rises. A person focused on gathering may look up to find the path back covered. Waves that seem regular can suddenly come higher. Rip currents can pull a swimmer or wader away from shore with frightening speed. Wet rocks become slick as bone. Kelp can wrap around legs. A calm lagoon can hide channels that deepen suddenly. No single explanation fully accounts for the ancient emotional power of the sea, but its unpredictability at human scale must have played a central role. Tides may have seemed especially strange before they were understood as celestial rhythm. The sea advances and retreats without legs, mouth, or visible command. It withdraws to reveal food, then returns to cover the same ground. It gives access and removes it. For coastal people who know its timing, this is knowledge. For the inexperienced, it is a trap. The difference between feast and death may be a memory of hours. Storms make the sea more terrifying still. A storm tide can erase beaches, smash trees into cliffs, flood estuaries with salt water, and throw foam far beyond the normal edge. Waves carry stones, logs, shells, and bodies. The roar alone can dominate the senses. Early humans near coasts would have understood that the sea has moods, though they may not have separated wind, pressure, swell, and tide in modern terms. They saw the practical truth. The same water that yesterday offered mussels and fish could today become a wall of moving force. And then there is the horizon. Inland water has an opposite bank, even if distant. The open sea seems to have none. For early humans standing at the edge of an ocean, the visible world ends in a line that cannot be reached by walking. Birds vanish into it. Storms rise from it. Driftwood arrives from unknown places. The sea brings objects with no story attached, things torn from elsewhere and delivered like messages from a world beyond sight. This must have stirred not only fear but curiosity. A dangerous landscape that also suggests hidden abundance is exactly the kind of place humans cannot ignore forever. Coastal living may have offered a buffer in hard times. Marine foods can be reliable when terrestrial hunting fails, though not all coasts are equally rich, and not all groups had equal access or knowledge. Shellfish especially are sometimes described as fallback foods, but that phrase can underestimate the skill involved in collecting them safely and sustainably. Some shellfish are toxic at certain times, some are difficult to access, some require tools or fire. A rocky shore is not a pantry unless a culture knows how to read it. The lesser-known detail is that coastal food may have shaped social time. Low tide creates a temporary window. People gather when the sea permits, then retreat when it closes. This rhythm can organise movement, labour, teaching, and memory. Children learn by watching adults judge pools and rocks. Elders remember which storms changed the channel. Knowledge becomes attached to place, and place becomes attached to timing. Deep water remains frightening, but the edge becomes familiar enough to use. The coast also creates encounters with death that are different from inland death. A drowned animal may wash ashore swollen and altered. A human body taken by water may return changed or not return at all. Bones can be scattered by waves, buried in sand, or carried away. The sea transforms remains, and transformation is fertile ground for belief. It would be careless to claim that later ideas of sea spirits or drowned souls come directly from Paleolithic beaches. But the sensory experience is old. The water takes, changes, and sometimes gives back. What survives in archaeology can look ordinary shells, bones, hearths, stone flakes. Yet behind those traces is a careful choreography at the edge of danger. Someone knows when to descend to the rocks. Someone knows how far children may go. Someone watches the sky. Someone remembers the pool where a foot slipped, the channel where the current runs outward, the place where a storm once climbed higher than expected. The coast teaches abundance and humility together. This is why early humans could be both terrified of deep water and dependent on it. Fear did not prevent coastal life. It structured it. It drew invisible lines across beaches, reefs, estuaries, and lagoons. It made some places ordinary, some sacred, some forbidden, some seasonal, some worth risking only when hunger pressed hard enough. Deep water beyond the shallows remained a boundary, but the boundary was not fixed. With each generation, people learned a little more of its moods. The shoreline therefore becomes one of the great classrooms of human history. It teaches that danger can feed you. It teaches that a hostile element can be approached through patience. It teaches that knowledge is not the absence of fear, but fear made useful. Early humans standing on those vanished Ice Age coasts were not merely looking at water, they were looking at possibility, and at the cost of reaching for it. The first warnings about deep water were probably not formal teachings. They were moments. A child pulled back from a bank by a quick hand. A sharp sound from an elder when someone steps too close to dark reeds. A group falling silent near a pool where something happened years before. Early humans did not need writing to build memory. They had bodies, places, gestures, scars, and grief, and these were enough to make water dangerous long after the immediate danger had passed. Children would have been central to this memory because children are drawn to edges. They follow insects, floating leaves, small fish, reflections, and the simple pleasure of touching what moves. Shallow water invites play, and play is one of the ways young humans learn the world. But a child does not easily judge depth, current, mud, cold, or the difference between a safe pool and a deadly one. For a small prehistoric group, losing a child near water would not be a private tragedy only. It would become a lesson carried by everyone. The evidence remains incomplete, because archaeology rarely preserves the emotional life of children. Small footprints in ancient mud, child-sized tools, burials, ornaments, and occasional traces of play suggest that young people were active participants in prehistoric life, not invisible background figures. They learned by imitation, by correction, and by being corrected quickly when danger was near. A warning about deep water may have been among the earliest forms of environmental education. Not an abstract rule, but a command linked to a place. Memory becomes stronger when it is attached to landscape. A certain bend in the river is not just water, it is where the bank collapsed. A dark pool is where someone vanished. A tidal channel is where the return path closed too soon. Such places become marked even without monuments. People point, they avoid, they speak differently. The landscape itself becomes a record, and the record is updated by survival. Over generations, practical memory can harden into taboo. Do not go there. Do not drink there. Do not cross after rain. Do not enter when the water is black. Do not follow floating wood into the current. The original reason may remain clear for a while, then blur. A crocodile attack becomes a dangerous spirit. A drowning becomes a forbidden pool. A flood becomes a story about anger, punishment, or a boundary crossed at the wrong time. This does not mean ancient people were inventing nonsense to explain what they failed to understand. It means that culture often preserves danger in forms that are easier to remember than technical description. A dry instruction can be forgotten. A frightening story stays. This is not unique to water, but water is especially suited to it because it hides evidence. When a person disappears on land, tracks, blood, or broken vegetation may point toward a cause. When a person disappears into deep water, the cause may remain uncertain. Uncertainty invites narrative, and narrative can protect. No single explanation fully accounts for how taboos form in early societies. But the connection between repeated danger, memory, and rule-making is deeply human. There is a surprising seriousness to children's games in this context. Play near water may have trained balance, judgment, and courage, but it also created risk. Throwing sticks into currents, wading in shallows, catching small fish by hand, testing slippery rocks, all of these activities teach the body what adults cannot fully explain. A community that forbids all contact with water may leave children ignorant. A community that allows too much contact may lose them. Somewhere between fear and practice, a culture must find its own line. That line would vary enormously. A group living beside calm lagoons may teach swimming early and treat water as familiar. A group near crocodile rivers may teach avoidance with uncompromising force. Coastal gatherers may let children help in tidal pools but never beyond a certain reef. Inland hunters may approach deep water only for drinking and crossings. Scholars still debate how much swimming ability and aquatic skill differed among prehistoric populations. But it is almost certain there was no single human pattern. Water knowledge is local knowledge. Deaths near water also affect the structure of attention. Someone must watch the children. Someone must judge the weather. Someone must remember the tide. Someone must test the crossing. These roles may not have been fixed in any formal sense, but they would have mattered. The group that survives is not merely the group with brave hunters, it is the group with careful watchers. Around water, vigilance becomes a social technology. The emotional force of warning may have shaped language itself, though direct proof is impossible. Words for danger, depth, current, crossing, mud, flood, and forbidden places must be among the practical vocabularies of communities that live near water, even before complex myth. There would be names. A named place is easier to remember, a named danger is easier to transmit. What survives in the record suggests that humans have long attached meaning to landscapes. And water would have offered some of the strongest reasons to do so. Grief strengthens these meanings. A lost person changes how a place is seen. The river continues moving, indifferent and unchanged. But the group is not unchanged. Each return to the bank carries the memory. For early humans, whose communities were small and interdependent, every death mattered deeply. The loss of a skilled gatherer, a child, a parent, or an elder was not only emotional but practical. Knowledge vanished with people. Hands vanished, future children vanished, water. But taking life suddenly could alter the fragile balance of a band. And yet the group must return, they must drink, they must gather, they must cross. This is where warning becomes more than fear. It becomes a method for continuing life beside danger. People do not abandon the river because the river has taken someone. They approach it differently, they shift the camp, they teach the young, they remember the season, they alter the path. In this way, tragedy becomes knowledge, though never without cost. Later myths of drowned children, river spirits, forbidden pools, and beings that lure the unwary may preserve echoes of this practical world, but they should not be treated as simple windows into the Paleolithic. Cultures transform fear into art, law, religion, and story in ways that are specific to their time and place. Still, the emotional architecture is ancient. Deep water is where absence happens. It is where a person can pass from visible life into invisible loss in a single moment. So the terror of deep water was not carried only by individuals, it was carried by communities. It lived in warnings passed from older hands to younger bodies. It lived in paths that bent away from certain banks. It lived in the silence around remembered places. The human fear of deep water is therefore partly inherited through biology, but also inherited through attention. Children learned it because adults had learned it. And adults had learned it because the water had taught them in the harshest language available. Fear can keep people alive, but it can also hold a horizon in place. For early humans, deep water is a boundary that says stop, yet the archaeological record keeps showing the same uncomfortable truth: people did not always stop. At different times, in different regions, humans and their close relatives crossed water that could not be treated as a simple puddle, a shallow stream, or a mistaken step. They reached islands, they moved along coasts, they followed resources across channels. They entered a world where caution had to become invention. The most famous crossings belong to later seafaring societies with boats, sails, maps, stars, and inherited navigation. But the deeper story begins much earlier, in a time when the evidence is thinner and more contested. Stone tools and fossils on islands have forced scholars to ask how much water ancient humans were willing, or able, to cross. Islands such as Flores in Indonesia are especially striking because they preserve traces of ancient hominins in places separated by water, even during periods of low sea level. The exact routes, technologies, and intentions remain debated, but the existence of people or human relatives there suggests that water barriers were not always absolute. This does not mean early humans were calmly sailing wherever they wished. It means the old picture of water as a perfect wall has become harder to defend. Some crossings may have been accidental, caused by storms, drifting vegetation, or people clinging to narrow rafts after floods. Others may have involved simple watercraft, perhaps logs, bamboo, reed bundles, or lashed materials that almost never preserve archaeologically. The evidence remains incomplete because the earliest boats were likely made from perishable things, and because many ancient shorelines are now underwater. Still, even uncertainty changes the story. Fear did not prevent crossing. It made crossing rare, meaningful, and dangerous. Consider what it would take to cross a channel without advanced technology. The group must first believe there is something beyond the water worth reaching. Perhaps another shore is visible. Perhaps birds fly regularly in one direction. Perhaps smoke, mountains, clouds, or driftwood suggest land. The water itself must be judged current, wind, tide, distance, season, animals, floating debris. A crossing is not one decision but many, each one vulnerable to error. A raft that works in a calm lagoon may fail in a tidal channel. A swimmer strong in a river may be helpless against surf. A child, an injured adult, tools, fire, and food all complicate the act. Fire is a hidden problem in this story. To move into new land, people often need not only bodies but embers, knowledge, and tools. Keeping fire alive across wet conditions is difficult. Carrying dry tinder, protecting coals, or knowing how to make fire again would matter enormously. A crossing that delivers people but loses crucial equipment may still become a disaster. Deep water threatens not only life but culture. It can take the sharp stone, the prepared hide, the gathered seed, the carefully carried flame, yet the rewards could be immense. Islands often contain animals unfamiliar with human predators. Coastal routes may offer predictable food. New land may mean fewer rivals, new stone sources, safer camps, or escape from pressure. In some cases, the water barrier itself becomes protection once crossed. A group that survives the passage may find itself in a landscape where the very thing that terrified them now guards them from others. Water can isolate, but isolation can also shelter. The peopling of Sahul, the ancient combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea during periods of lower sea level, stands as one of the great examples of human movement across water. Early modern humans reached that region tens of thousands of years ago, and even with Ice Age sea levels lower than today, some sea crossings were necessary. Scholars still debate the exact routes, timings, and technologies, but the broader fact is powerful people crossed open water before agriculture. Before metal, before cities, before written navigation, they did so as hunter-gatherers carrying social knowledge, tools, and enough confidence to face a boundary that their bodies were not naturally built to command. This achievement should not be romanticized into a tale of fearless explorers. The more compelling image is of people who were afraid and went anyway, or who had learned enough that fear no longer ruled every decision. Perhaps they crossed in stages, island to island, watching birds and currents. Perhaps they moved when weather windows were favourable. Perhaps they had watercraft more capable than the surviving evidence can show. What survives in the record suggests successful arrival. Not the failed attempts that must have happened. Archaeology is usually better at preserving survival than disaster. There is a quiet tragedy in that imbalance. For every crossing that established a population, there may have been attempts that left no trace at all. A raft breaks, a storm rises, a current carries people away from a visible shore, a group reaches land but cannot find water, a child falls overboard. Such events would rarely fossilise. They would survive, if at all, as warnings, altered routes, or stories about why a certain passage is never attempted in a certain season. Crossings also change the meaning of leadership and trust. On land, if a path proves wrong, people may turn back, On deep water, turning back can become impossible. The person who judges the crossing carries the group into a condition where hesitation itself may be deadly. Trust must be placed in makers of rafts, readers of weather, elders who remember previous attempts, and those calm enough not to panic. Deep water therefore tests social knowledge as much as technical skill. The craft is not only the vessel, the craft is the whole culture of preparation. The possibility of accidental crossings remains important and disputed. Storms can carry vegetation mats, trees, and animals across channels. Floods can tear away banks with people or animals on them. Some island colonizations by non-human animals likely happened this way, but relying on accident alone becomes harder to accept where repeated human presence, tool-making, and settlement appear. No single explanation fully accounts for every early island occupation. Some may involve chance. Some may involve planning. Some may involve a long sequence between the two, where people first survive accidental drift, then later learn to repeat or improve the crossing. What matters for the fear of deep water is that each crossing transforms terror into knowledge. The first person to cling to a floating log learns something. The first group to lash reeds together learns something more. The first successful return from across a channel changes the mental map of everyone who hears it. The water is still dangerous, but it is no longer pure impossibility. The horizon, once a wall, becomes a question. This is one of the great human patterns. The most frightening boundaries often become routes. Mountain passes, deserts, ice fields, caves, and seas all begin as limits, then slowly become known through repeated risk. Deep water may have been among the hardest of these because the human body loses so much power within it. But humans compensate with memory, tools, cooperation, and imagination. They do not become aquatic animals. They become makers of artificial confidence. By the time early people cross real channels and reach distant shores, deep water has changed from enemy to adversary. It remains capable of killing them at any moment, yet it can also be negotiated. That negotiation is never complete. Even the most skilled water people respect weather, current, and depth. But the act of crossing proves something profound about human fear. Fear is not simply a chain. Sometimes it is the pressure that forces intelligence into new forms. The same water that once stopped the foot at the shore eventually carries people into worlds they could never have reached by land. The crossings that changed human history were not made across the coastlines we see today. Much of that older world is gone, not because it was imaginary, but because the sea climbed over it. During colder periods of the Ice Age, so much water was locked away in glaciers that global sea levels fell dramatically. Continental shelves became plains, islands joined to larger lands, rivers cut through valleys that are now bays, campsites, shell-gathering places, fishing grounds, and paths along ancient shores lay far beyond the modern beach. Then the climate warmed, ice melted, and the sea returned. This is one of the great traps in understanding early human fear of deep water. The places where people most often negotiated with coasts are often the places least likely to remain available to archaeologists. A cave high above the present sea may preserve tools and bones. A rocky inland shelter can hold ash, pigments, and burials. But a beach camp from a low-stand shoreline may now sit beneath meters of water, sand, mud, and marine life, if it has survived at all. The sea did not simply erase footprints, it moved the archive. For early humans living through changing coastlines, sea level rise would not have looked like a line on a chart. It would have appeared as a slow transformation of familiar places. A spring near the shore becomes brackish, a path across a marsh disappears, a stand of trees dies as salt enters the roots, a hunting ground floods more often, a campsite that elders remember as safe becomes too close to stormwater. In some regions, change may have been gradual enough for generations to adapt. In others, local events such as storms, ice collapse, or shifting channels could make the change feel sudden and violent. The evidence remains incomplete, but the lived experience must have varied enormously. The drowning of landscapes would have deepened water's symbolic power. Deep water was already dangerous because it concealed depth and death. Now it could also conceal memory. A place where people had walked, gathered, made fires, and buried their dead could vanish under waves. The shoreline itself could migrate across the world, turning land into seabed and forcing human groups to follow, retreat, or reimagine their maps. No single explanation fully accounts for later stories of drowned lands or sunken worlds, and many such stories belong to much more recent cultures with their own histories. Still, the physical process behind the image is real and ancient. The sea has repeatedly covered human ground. Doggerland, the now submerged landscape that once connected Britain to continental Europe, offers a later but vivid example of this kind of transformation. It was not a mythic kingdom, but a real Mesolithic world of rivers, wetlands, animals, and people, gradually lost as sea levels rose after the last glacial maximum. Other submerged landscapes exist around the world, from continental shelves off Southeast Asia to ancient coastal plains near Australia and the Americas. These places remind us that the modern map is only the latest frame in a long film. Early humans often lived in countries that are no longer dry. This matters because it changes how we imagine water fear. A coastline is not only an edge between two stable realms, it is a moving frontier for people tracking herds, gathering shellfish, returning to seasonal camps, or teaching children the names of places. Rising water would have introduced a disturbing lesson. The boundary cannot be trusted to stay where it is. Deep water does not merely wait beyond the land. Given enough time, it comes forward. That movement would have affected migration. Lower sea levels opened routes that later closed. Land bridges appeared, widened, narrowed, and vanished. The same global process that made some crossings easier also made later shorelines harder to read. When sea levels were low, certain islands were closer, channels narrower, and coastal plains broader. When sea levels rose, groups could become isolated, forced inland, or pushed into new contact with others. Fear of deep water may have intensified where people watched familiar routes disappear under water that was once distant. Archaeologists searching for the earliest coastal migrations face a difficult irony. If humans spread along shorelines rich in food, many of their stopping places are probably underwater now. This is especially important in debates about early movement into new continents and regions. Coastal routes can be plausible, sometimes strongly supported by environmental logic, but direct evidence may be scarce because the relevant beaches no longer exist. Scholars still debate specific timings and pathways, not because the idea lacks importance, but because the sea has hidden much of the courtroom. Underwater archaeology has begun to recover parts of this lost story, but it is hard work. Ancient land surfaces must be found beneath sediment. Tools must be distinguished from naturally broken stone. Organic remains may be scattered, eroded, or buried. Diving, sonar mapping, sediment cores, and remote sensing offer glimpses, yet only a tiny fraction of the submerged prehistoric world has been examined. What survives in the record suggests that the missing evidence may be enormous. The absence of sites on modern coasts does not always mean people were absent from ancient ones. For early humans themselves, the sea level trap would have been emotional as well as geographical. A people whose elders remembered a former shoreline might carry stories of lost camps, lost hunting grounds, or islands that could once be reached on foot. Whether such memories lasted for centuries or millennia depends on culture, continuity, and the scale of change, and must be approached cautiously. But human beings are capable of preserving place memory with remarkable endurance when it matters. A drowned valley is not just a geological event, it is a wound in the map. The sea also changes the evidence of fear. A taboo pool on land may remain visible. A dangerous river bend may still be named. But a feared channel, a storm-drowned camp, or a reef where people died during a crossing may now lie far offshore. Later generations may inherit only the story, not the place. Over time, the story may detach from geography and become mythic. It is tempting to see every flood myth as a memory of post-ice age sea level rise, but that would be too simple. Floods happen in rivers, storms, tsunamis, and local disasters as well. Yet the broader human experience of losing land to water is real enough to have fed imagination again and again. There is a darker consequence too. Rising seas can make deep water seem victorious. A river kills individuals. A predator takes bodies. But the sea can take whole landscapes. It can cover the places where ancestors lived and make them unreachable except through memory. For people already cautious around depth, this would give water a grandeur beyond ordinary danger. It is not only the place where one person disappears, it is the force that makes worlds disappear. And still, humans followed it. As coastlines moved, people moved with them, not always willingly, not always safely, but persistently. They learned new estuaries, new reefs, new tidal flats, new islands, new risks. Their fear had to adapt to a changing planet. The deep water that erased old homes also created new shores rich with life. The trap and the opportunity were the same. So when we look at the modern ocean and imagine early humans standing before it, we are often imagining the wrong edge. Their shore may be beneath our waves. Their camps may lie under fishing grounds. Their warnings may have belonged to places without names on any present map. Deep water terrified them partly because it hid what was beneath the surface, but over time it came to hide something even more unsettling evidence of their own lives. The water did not only conceal monsters, currents, and darkness, it concealed history. Once water becomes a place of disappearance, it is almost inevitable that imagination begins to live there. A person vanishes below the surface and does not return. A flood covers familiar ground. Something large moves in the dark beyond the reach of firelight. A child is warned away from reeds by a story older than anyone can clearly explain. Over time, practical fear of deep water gathers shape, and those shapes become monsters, spirits, serpents, drowned worlds, and beings that belong to the boundary between the seen and the unseen. It is important to move carefully here. Myths are not simple fossils. A water serpent in one culture is not automatically a memory of crocodiles. A sea monster in a medieval manuscript is not direct evidence of Ice Age trauma. A drowned world in a later tradition does not prove a single prehistoric flood behind it. Scholars still debate how stories preserve environmental memory, and the evidence remains incomplete. But myths often grow from repeated human experiences. And deep water offers the same experiences across many landscapes: hidden danger, sudden death, strange creatures, reflection, darkness, and the possibility that the familiar world can be swallowed. The monster beneath the surface is therefore not merely a fantasy. It is a symbol with practical roots. Crocodiles wait like logs. Sharks rise from below. Hippos erupt from brown water. Snakes swim with only their heads visible. Large fish disturb the surface and vanish. Even harmless animals become uncanny when glimpsed only in fragments. The eye sees a ripple, a back, a tail, a gleam, a ring spreading outward. The mind completes the body below. In deep water, imagination is not decoration. It is a risk calculator working with too little information. Serpents are especially common in water stories because they match the behaviour of many things that frighten people at the edge. They are flexible, silent, difficult to read, and capable of appearing from holes, reeds, mud, or water. In many later traditions, serpent-like beings guard springs, live in rivers, encircle worlds, bring rain, block floods, or threaten order. No single explanation fully accounts for such widespread imagery. And similar forms can emerge independently because human minds respond to similar shapes and dangers. But the link between water, hidden movement, and snake-like power is ancient in feeling, even when particular stories are historically recent. Drowned world stories carry a different emotional weight. They are not about something rising from the water, but about land going under it. Cultures around the world preserve stories of floods, submerged settlements, lost islands, and vanished lands. Some may remember local inundations, storm surges, tsunamis, river floods, or post-glacial sea level rise. Others may be moral, ritual, political, or cosmological stories shaped by social concerns more than direct environmental memory. The careful position is not to reduce them all to geology or dismiss them all as invention. What survives in the record suggests that water repeatedly transformed human landscapes, and repeated transformation is exactly the kind of experience that story remembers. Tsunamis deserve a place in this darker imagination, though they are unevenly distributed across the world. Along tectonically active coasts, the sea can withdraw suddenly, exposing reefs and fish, then return as a destructive wall. For people who do not know the physics of earthquakes and wave propagation, this behaviour would seem almost intentional. The sea retreats as if offering a gift, then comes back to destroy, even today. Traditional knowledge in some coastal communities preserves warnings to flee when the sea withdraws unnaturally. This is practical memory encoded in story, and it shows how frightening narrative can become life-saving technology. Deep lakes can produce their own monsters. A lake may look still for days, then turn violent under wind. It may hold drowned trees, cold layers, sudden drop-offs, bubbles from decaying matter, or sounds caused by ice, waves, and shifting sediment. In some volcanic regions, lakes can even release gases under rare conditions, though such events are exceptional and not a general explanation for water myths. Still, the broader point remains. Water bodies behave in ways that can seem alive to observers without modern instruments. A lake that kills animals, changes colour, or releases strange smells becomes more than a place. It becomes a presence. There is a lesser-known psychological detail here. Humans are highly sensitive to agency. When something moves without an obvious cause, we tend to suspect intention. This tendency can be protective. Mistaking wind in the reeds for an animal is less costly than mistaking an animal for wind. Around deep water, where causes are often hidden, agency detection becomes especially active. The current pulls, the whirlpool grabs, the wave strikes, the pull takes. These are metaphors. But they arise naturally because water acts on bodies with force while concealing the mechanics behind that force. This is why later water beings are often morally complicated. They are not always evil. They can give fish, rain, fertility, healing, travel, and wealth. They can also drown, punish, lure, or demand respect. That dual nature mirrors the real water relationship. A river that feeds a community can kill a child. A sea that provides shellfish can erase a camp. A spring that saves lives in drought can become a guarded, sacred place because survival depends on it. The sacred and the dangerous are not opposites. Often, they are born together. Early humans, before writing, almost certainly told stories, though the exact content of those stories is lost. Language, gesture, song, and repeated teaching would have carried warnings and explanations. Around water, these stories may have described places where not to go, animals to respect, seasons to avoid, or crossings that demanded preparation. Over long periods, practical warning can become mythic narrative, and mythic narrative can continue to carry practical warning. The water monster may be disputed as literal history, but as a cultural tool, it makes perfect sense. The danger is in taking the monster too literally or too lightly. If it is treated literally, the explanation drifts into unsupported claims about surviving prehistoric beasts behind every legend. If it is treated as mere superstition, it misses the intelligence hidden inside fear. Many stories that sound strange to outsiders encode sharp environmental observations, which pools are unsafe, when floods come, where crocodiles nest, how tides behave, what signs precede storms. While children must not wander near reeds, a monster may be a memory device with teeth. The same applies to underworld imagery. Deep water often becomes a route to the dead in later symbolism because it physically resembles disappearance. A body sinks from the bright surface into a realm the living cannot enter for long. The dead may be imagined below, not because people are confused about biology, but because the sensory experience invites that geography. Land burials place the dead beneath earth. Drowning places them beneath water. Both are forms of below, but water adds movement. Reflection and return, it may give back a body or not. What makes water myths so enduring is that modern knowledge does not fully erase the old feeling. We can explain currents, refraction, tides, predators, pressure, and drowning physiology, yet a dark lake at night still feels different from a field. The imagination continues to complete unseen space. That continuity does not prove that modern fear is identical to prehistoric fear, but it suggests that the same human equipment is still operating eyes that cannot see below, lungs that know their limits, minds that search for agents in moving darkness. For early humans, then, monsters made from water danger were not failures of reason. They were attempts to give form to a world that resisted direct knowledge. The crocodile, the flood, the whirlpool, the drowned valley, the unseen cold below the surface, all could be gathered into figures that taught respect. A story can stand at the bank when an adult is not there. It can keep a child from stepping too close. It can make the invisible memorable. And so deep water enters the human past twice. First as a physical danger, then as an imaginative landscape. It becomes a place where real animals hunt, real currents pull, real storms erase, and real bodies vanish. But it also becomes the home of beings large enough to express what ordinary language cannot, that beneath the shining surface lies a world older than human confidence, a world that gives and takes without apology, and a world that must never be approached as if it were empty. Deep water does not only threaten the body, it divides the world. Long before maps are drawn with ink, people carry maps in movement and memory: the safe ridge, the hunting ground, the spring, the old camp, the valley where animals pass, the hill that marks the way home. Water cuts through these mental landscapes with a different kind of line. A river may be crossed in one season and impossible in another. A lake may hold a group on one side for days. The sea may mark the end of walking altogether. At its edge, geography becomes a question of permission. For early humans, this boundary was practical before it was symbolic. On one side there is fire, kin, known paths, and familiar signs. On the other side there may be food, stone, shelter, danger, rivals, or nothing at all. The water between them changes the meaning of distance. A place that can be seen across a channel may still be unreachable. A shore that looks close may be farther than the body can survive. This is one of deep water's strangest powers. It separates desire from ability. The eye arrives before the person can. That separation likely shaped how people understood belonging. A river can define a territory not because anyone declares it on a map, but because crossing it carries cost. Groups may know the far bank, watch animals there, see smoke there, or hear birds moving over it, yet visit only at certain times or by certain routes. Children born beside such a boundary grow up with a world that is visibly larger than their daily reach. Deep water teaches that not everything seen can be possessed. It also creates exile. To be cut off by flood, tide, or channel is to become suddenly vulnerable. A person stranded on a sandbar hears the group but cannot reach it. A band separated by rising water may see one another across a distance that would be trivial on land and fatal in water. The terror here is not ignorance but nearness. Safety is visible. Voices may carry, fire may be seen, yet the boundary refuses passage. No single explanation fully accounts for later ideas of rivers between life and death. But this experience gives the image a powerful foundation. The dead are not always imagined as infinitely far away. Sometimes they are just beyond a crossing, the living cannot make. Rivers in many later cultures become borders of the afterlife, purification, ordeal, or transformation. It would be too simple to project any one tradition backward into the deep Paleolithic, but the recurring symbolism is not hard to understand. Water changes bodies, it washes, chills, conceals, carries, and sometimes returns what it has taken. Crossing water can mark a transition from one status to another: child to adult, outsider to insider, living to dead, ordinary to sacred. The evidence remains incomplete for the earliest periods, yet the sensory logic is strong. A dangerous boundary that must sometimes be crossed is a natural place for meaning to gather. Deep water also makes return uncertain. A person who enters a forest can often retrace tracks. A person who crosses a river may find the water higher on the way back. A raft may drift away. Fog may hide the shore. Tide may cover rocks. The boundary does not wait obediently. This instability would have mattered to mobile hunter-gatherers whose lives depended on seasonal movement. The route that works at dawn may fail by dusk. The ford that works in dry season may vanish after storm. The lake that freezes in winter may become deadly in spring when ice thins. Water turns routes into negotiations. A lesser-known but important feature of many landscapes is that water boundaries can preserve difference. Islands, marshes, and river systems can isolate animal populations, plant communities, and human groups. Over time, isolation shapes bodies, languages, tools, and traditions. A channel only a few kilometers wide may limit contact enough for worlds to diverge. In deep history, such separation matters profoundly. The island is not just land surrounded by water, it is a laboratory of distance. And water is the wall? For humans, isolation can protect and endanger at the same time. A group separated by water may be safe from some predators or rivals, but also cut off from mates, resources, and rescue. Too much isolation can narrow possibilities. Too little can bring conflict. Deep water thus becomes part of social geography. It decides who meets whom, who trades, who competes, who remains unknown. What survives in the record suggests that even prehistoric networks could move stone, shells, pigments, and ideas across impressive distances. Yet where water intervened, every connection required some answer to fear. This boundary quality may explain why water often gathers rituals of approach. One does not simply walk into certain waters. One prepares, waits, watches, asks permission, makes offerings, or follows rules. Not all prehistoric groups would have ritualized water in the same way, and direct evidence is rare, but around dangerous resources, ritual can function as disciplined attention. A rule that seems symbolic may control timing, behavior, or respect for risk. If a community says a crossing must happen only under certain conditions, that belief may encode generations of practical observation. The boundary between land and water is also a boundary between human certainty and non-human mastery. On land, people can modify the world with fire, tools, shelters, traps, paths, and marks. In deep water, their modifications are harder won. A stake driven into mud may vanish in flood, a fish trap may be destroyed by storm, a raft may rot or break. Water resists permanence. This resistance can make it feel older and more powerful than human work. A camp can be rebuilt. A drowned valley cannot easily be reclaimed. And yet boundaries invite crossing precisely because they promise transformation. A young person who learns to swim across a dangerous channel is not the same afterward. A group that reaches an island has altered its world. A people who master a river gain access to both banks. Deep water frightens because it can kill, but it also dignifies those who learn its terms. Fear becomes part of status. The careful ferryman, the skilled swimmer, the reader of tides, the maker of boats. The one who knows when not to cross, all hold knowledge that others depend on. Scholars still debate how early such specialized roles emerged, because the material evidence is uneven. But specialization does not need cities or written titles. It begins whenever one person has a skill others trust. Around water, that skill may be quiet judging cloud and wind, knowing the safest ford, reading floating debris, hearing the change in surf, recognizing where a river has undercut its bank. Such knowledge turns a boundary into a managed risk. Still, deep water never loses its symbolic edge entirely. Even when crossed, it remains a reminder that the human world is conditional. The land path is not guaranteed. The camp can be cut off. The known can sink. The living can vanish into a place that refuses tracks. This is why water works so well as a boundary in human thought. It is visible and unstable, necessary and dangerous, inviting and forbidding. It can be touched but not held. For early humans standing before deep water, the boundary was therefore more than a physical obstacle. It was a lesson in limits. It taught that the world contained spaces where human skill must be remade, where confidence must pause, where the social group must decide together whether hunger, hope, or necessity justifies the crossing. In that pause, one can see the beginning of many later human ideas: the far shore as promise, the river as judgment, the sea as exile, the crossing as transformation, and the deep as a place where ordinary life ends before another kind of world begins. The first floating log must have seemed like a contradiction. Wood belongs to trees, trees belong to land, and yet here is a piece of land's own body resting on the surface of water, instead of sinking into it. For a human watching from the bank, this is not a small observation. It is a clue. Water can take people down, but it does not take everything down. Some things remain above, some things can carry weight. The same surface that refuses the human foot may accept a branch, a reed bundle, a fallen trunk, a skin filled with air. Somewhere in such observations begins the long, uneven history of learning to trust what floats. This was not a single invention made in one place and then handed to all humankind. It was probably many discoveries, forgotten and rediscovered, shaped by local materials and local dangers. In one region, bamboo floats naturally and can be lashed into rafts. In another, reeds can be bundled. Elsewhere, logs can be hollowed, bark can be shaped, skins can be inflated, gourds can support a load, and simple frames can turn fear into passage. The evidence remains incomplete because early watercraft were made from materials that rot, burn, break, and disappear. Stone tools survive, a reed raft usually does not. Before boats, there may have been aids: a branch used to steady a crossing, a log pushed ahead of the body, a bundle used to keep a child or food above water, a floating carcass avoided and then understood, driftwood followed, tested, remembered. These small acts do not look heroic, but they are revolutionary. They allow humans to borrow buoyancy from the world. Instead of asking the body to defeat water alone, they asked wood, bark, reed, or skin to share the danger. The first trust would have been cautious. A log rolls, wet bark is slippery, a raft breaks apart if tied poorly, a hollowed trunk can tip, a current can turn a useful float into a trap. A person clinging to wood may survive longer, but also drift farther from shore. No single explanation fully accounts for the earlier steps from floating object to deliberate craft, but the path was surely marked by failure. Water punishes bad design quickly. A knot that holds on land may loosen when soaked. A craft that carries one person may fail with two. A calm pool may flatter an invention that the river destroys. This is where human cooperation becomes decisive. One person can notice a floating log, a group can improve it. Someone tests, someone watches, someone remembers which wood floats best, which reeds hold air, which fibres tighten when wet, which knots slip, which shapes tip, which loads must be balanced. The technology of water is not just the object, it is the accumulated memory around the object. A raft without knowledge is debris. A raft with knowledge becomes a threshold. Fishing gear follows the same pattern. At first, hands, baskets, stones, Spears and traps in shallow water may be enough. A fish caught in a pool teaches timing. A line of stones can guide movement. A woven barrier can trap what the eye can barely follow. Bone points, shell hooks, nets, harpoons, and weirs appear in different archaeological contexts much later and unevenly. But they all express the same deeper shift humans stop merely approaching water and begin arranging it. They cannot command the whole river, but they can shape a narrow part of it. This matters for fear because tools create partial confidence. A person with a spear at the bank is not safe from a crocodile, but they are not empty-handed. A group with a fish trap does not need to wade as far. A raft can keep bodies out of the current, at least in gentle conditions. A container can carry water away from the bank, reducing repeated exposure. Each tool redraws the line between risk and use. Deep water remains dangerous, but it becomes less purely mysterious. There is a surprising intimacy in this process. To make a watercraft, people must study materials almost as closely as they study animals. They must know the tree not only as shade or fuel, but as buoyancy. They must know reed beds not only as places of birds and insects, but as bundles of trapped air. They must understand that a skin can hold wind, that pitch or resin can seal a seam, that fire can help hollow wood without destroying it, that weight must be placed low and centered. These are subtle lessons. They turn the landscape into a library of possible solutions. Scholars still debate the antiquity of many early water technologies because direct evidence is scarce. The oldest preserved boats known from archaeology are far younger than the first human water crossings that must have occurred. That gap does not mean boats did not exist earlier. It means preservation is unfair. A wooden craft abandoned on a shore is unlikely to survive tens of thousands of years unless conditions are exceptional. The crossing suggests some kind of solution, but the objects themselves are often gone. What survives in the record may be the human presence on the far shore rather than the vessel that made it possible. Water technology also changes how people imagine distance. A river that once required a dangerous swim can become a route. A lake can be crossed instead of walked around. A marsh can be entered for birds, eggs, reeds, and fish. A channel can connect rather than divide. This does not happen everywhere at once, and it does not erase fear. In fact, better technology may bring people into deeper danger by making them bold enough to go farther. A raft opens the water, but it also exposes the group to wind, waves, and the terrible moment when land is too distant to reach by swimming. The first vessels were likely close to shore, close to rivers, close to visible destinations. Open ocean navigation is another story, built over long experience and often much later in many parts of the world. But even the simplest craft alters the human relationship with deep water. The body no longer has to be fully immersed. Breath is protected. Tools and food can be carried. Children and elders can sometimes cross. Fire may be transported more carefully. The group can move as a group instead of scattering through a ford. Still, the fear remains useful. The people who trust a craft too much may die. The people who trust fear too much may never cross. Survival lies between those errors. A good water culture is not fearless. It is disciplined. It knows when the wind is wrong, when clouds mean waiting, when a river has risen too fast, when a boat is overloaded, when a child must sit still, when a crossing should be abandoned despite hunger or desire. Fear becomes part of the technology, as necessary as rope or wood. Over time, the floating log becomes something greater than a tool. It becomes evidence that the world's dangers contain their own answers. If watched carefully enough, the same storm that drops branches into a river may show what floats. The same flood that carries debris may reveal how current moves. The same shore that frightens a child may provide reeds for a raft. Human beings do not escape nature by invention. They invent by paying attention to nature's hints. So the slow development of rafts, canoes, fishing gear, and crossing knowledge marks a turning point in the deep water story. Water is no longer only a surface that hides death. It is a medium that can be used, entered indirectly, read through signs, and negotiated with tools. The terror does not vanish. It becomes layered with skill. The old fear at the edge is still there, but beside it now sits another feeling, quieter and more dangerous in its own way. Confidence. Once people learn to cross water, even imperfectly, fear begins to change into power. The same river that once blocked a group can become a route no rival on foot can easily match. The same coast that once threatened drowning can become a chain of camps, food sources, and hidden passages. The same marsh that once seemed like a trap can become a refuge to those who know its channels. Deep water does not become safe, but it becomes useful in a new way. It becomes a landscape of advantage. The first advantage is food. A group that can gather from water gains access to resources unavailable to those who remain entirely on land. Fish, shellfish, water birds, eggs, reeds, turtles, aquatic plants, and stranded marine animals can widen the diet and reduce dependence on the success of large hunts. This does not mean aquatic foods were always easy or abundant. Some waters are poor, seasonal, toxic, or dangerous. But where conditions are favourable and knowledge is strong, water can feed people reliably enough to reshape movement, settlement, and social life. What survives in the record suggests that many human communities learn this lesson repeatedly in different regions. Food gathered from water can also be predictable in unusual ways. Tides return, fish migrate, birds nest seasonally, rivers flood and retreat, shellfish stay fixed to rock. A deer may not appear where expected, but a mussel bed is less likely to run away. This reliability matters, especially for children, elders, pregnant people, injured people, and anyone unable to join difficult hunts. Aquatic foods may not replace terrestrial resources, but they can stabilise life. The group that understands the shoreline has a buffer against uncertainty. The second advantage is movement. Water can slow the unskilled, but speed the skilled. A river valley often cuts through difficult terrain, guiding travel through forests, plains, and mountains. A raft or canoe can move loads that would be exhausting to carry. A coast offers a visible corridor with recurring resources along the way. Even without advanced navigation, people can follow edges shore to shore, headland to headland, island to island, river bend to river bend. Fear remains. But the map expands. This is one reason water knowledge can become strategic. A group that knows a safe crossing controls more than movement. It controls information. They know where animals cross. They know where outsiders are likely to appear. They know which ford fails after rain and which one remains passable. They know when a tide reveals a path across mudflats and when it seals the passage again. Such knowledge can decide whether a group reaches food first, avoids conflict, or escapes danger. The boundary becomes a tool. There is a lesser-known power in wetlands. Marshes, deltas, and reed beds often seem hostile to outsiders because they confuse direction and footing. Channels split and rejoin. Ground that looks solid may sink. Insects swarm. Visibility is low. Yet to people who know them, wetlands can be rich and protective. They offer fish, birds, eggs, fibres, edible plants, and concealment. They can frustrate enemies and shelter small communities. The same landscape that terrifies the unfamiliar can become home to the practiced. Deep water's fear is partly local ignorance. Mastery turns it inside out. Water also changes exchange. Shells found far from coasts in archaeological contexts show that marine materials could move inland, sometimes over impressive distances. Not every shell means direct travel by the people who used it. Objects may pass through exchange networks, but the movement itself matters. Water's edge produces things that carry beauty, status, memory, and identity beyond the shore. A shell bead inland is a small sign that the coast has entered social life elsewhere. It is the sea made portable. As water knowledge grows, so does inequality of skill. Not everyone can judge a crossing, build a craft, swim confidently, spear fish, read tide, or navigate fog. Those who can may become especially valuable. Their knowledge can bring food, rescue stranded people, retrieve lost objects, cross to new land, or guide others through dangerous places. Scholars still debate how specialised such roles were in deep prehistory, but skill differences surely existed in small groups. Expertise does not require formal titles. It only requires others to know who should be trusted when the water is rising. Power over water may also have shaped conflict. A river can defend a camp, a boat can raid, flee, scout, or trade. An island can protect stores, a marsh route can hide movement. These possibilities become clearer in later archaeological and historical periods, but the underlying logic is older. Terrain matters in human conflict, and water is terrain with special rules. The group that knows those rules can make danger serve them. Yet this power is never complete. Deep water punishes arrogance. A skilled fisher drowns, a good boat fails, a known channel shifts, a storm overturns inherited wisdom. This is why water mastery tends to preserve humility. People may become expert, but they rarely become casual if their knowledge is honest. No single explanation fully accounts for the rituals, taboos, and respect surrounding water in later cultures, but some of that respect likely reflects a practical truth. The element that gives power can withdraw it instantly. The transformation from fear to power also alters imagination. The far shore becomes less like a forbidden realm and more like a possible future. A river's mouth becomes a meeting place. Islands become stepping stones. Fish runs become calendars. Tides become clocks. The world becomes larger not because fear has disappeared, but because fear has been organised. The old terror at the dark surface is still present, but now it is accompanied by techniques, stories, routes, and remembered successes. This may be one of the most important human adaptations of all the ability to live with a danger long enough to make it productive. Fire burns, yet humans cook with it. Stone cuts, yet humans shape blades from it. Deep water drowns, yet humans learn to cross, fish, trade, and migrate through it. Mastery does not mean removing danger. It means building a relationship in which danger can be approached without denial. What survives in the record suggests that this relationship helped humans become a more flexible species. Aquatic foods may have supported populations in harsh periods. Coastal routes may have aided dispersal. Rivers may have guided movement into new territories. Islands may have tested the limits of planning and cooperation. The evidence remains incomplete, especially beneath modern seas, but the pattern is persuasive humans who learned water gained options. And options are power. In a changing climate, the group with more food sources survives better. In a crowded landscape, the group with more routes avoids pressure. In a dangerous world, the group with more refuges endures. Deep water, once only a place of terror, becomes a hidden reserve of possibilities. It still takes the careless. It still frightens the child at the bank. It still turns black at night. But for those who learn it, it also opens doors that land alone cannot provide. The irony is sharp and very human. Early people were terrified of deep water because it exposed their limits. Then, by studying those limits, they found new strengths. They could not breathe below the surface, so they made vessels. They could not see into mud, so they learned signs. They could not outrun currents, so they learned timing. They could not turn water into land, so they turned floating things into temporary ground. Fear became discipline. Discipline became skill. And skill became a kind of power that would one day carry human beings across oceans. The fear that began at ancient shorelines has not left the human body. Modern people live with maps, boats, life jackets, engines, weather forecasts, swimming pools, coast guards, sonar, and satellite images, yet deep water still unsettles many of us with surprising force. A person can stand on a dock in perfect safety, look down into black depth, and feel the stomach tighten. A swimmer can move calmly through clear shallows, and suddenly hesitate where the bottom falls away. The old boundary remains, even when civilization has built railings around it. Part of this fear is learned, and part of it is physical. The lungs still know their limits, the eyes still fail in murky water, the feet still search for ground, the mind still dislikes spaces where danger can approach from below without being seen. Modern knowledge can explain the feeling, but explanation does not always dissolve it. A dark lake at night does not become emotionally simple because one understands ecology. The open ocean does not become small because it can be measured. Deep water frightens because the body meets it before reason finishes speaking. This is why drowning remains such a powerful human fear. It is quiet, intimate, and absolute. It can happen in a river, a sea, a well, a pond, a flooded cave, or a domestic container. It does not require violence in the ordinary sense. It can occur within sight of land, within reach of others, in water that looked harmless moments before. Early humans did not need statistics to respect that danger, and modern humans, despite all our technology, still discover how quickly water can turn ordinary confidence into helplessness. The unease around deep water often intensifies when the bottom vanishes. Clear tropical water may be beautiful, but when it shifts from pale sand to sudden blue depth, many swimmers feel a jolt. The colour change is a visual cliff. In lakes, the same effect appears as green-black opacity. In rivers, it appears as brown current with no readable floor. The human brain wants boundaries, and depth removes them. What survives from ancient fear is not a precise memory of crocodile banks or ice age coasts, but a basic alertness to unreadable space. There is also the fear of scale. Deep water makes humans feel small in a way land rarely does. A mountain can dwarf a person, but it is visible. The ocean hides most of itself. Even a small boat floats above a volume too large to imagine directly. Beneath it may be fish, rocks, weeds, wreckage, darkness, cold layers, or nothing near at all. That nothing can be as disturbing as a monster because it means the body has no purchase. Emptiness below is still a threat. Modern stories reveal how persistent this feeling is. Films, novels, legends, and documentaries return again and again to sharks, giant waves, deep lakes, submerged caves, shipwrecks, abyssal trenches, sea monsters, and lost cities underwater. Some of these are exaggerated, some are scientifically grounded, and some are pure invention, but they all draw from the same well of feeling. Deep water is one of the few natural environments where the ancient fear remains easy to access. One look over the side of a boat can do what 1,000 years of technology cannot entirely undo. Scholars still debate how much of human fear of deep water should be described as evolved instinct, cultural inheritance, personal experience, or symbolic imagination. No single explanation fully accounts for it. A child who has never seen a crocodile may still fear dark water. A skilled swimmer may still feel uneasy in the open ocean. A person raised far from coasts may dream of drowning. At the same time, many communities develop comfort, joy, and expertise around water from childhood. The fear is not universal in the same form, but the ingredients are widely available in the human body. This is important because it prevents a simple story. Humans are not naturally doomed to fear water, nor are they naturally at home in it. They're adaptable. Some people become divers, sailors, fishers, surfers, and swimmers whose lives are shaped by affection for water. Others avoid it intensely. Most live somewhere between attraction and caution. That range probably existed in the deep past as well. The difference is that early humans faced the water without modern safety nets. So the cost of misjudgment was far less forgiving. Even today, water expertise often begins with learning not to panic. Swimming lessons teach breath, floating, rhythm, and trust in buoyancy. Life-saving instruction teaches people not to let a drowning person drag them under. Divers learn to respect pressure, visibility, currents, and ascent. Sailors learn weather humility. These modern disciplines echo ancient lessons in new forms. They all say the same thing: fear must be trained, not ignored. The fear also survives in language. People speak of being out of their depth, drowning in trouble, being swept away, going under, staying afloat. These are not technical statements about water. They are metaphors for losing control. Water remains one of the most natural images for overwhelming force because the body understands it immediately. To be out of depth is to have lost the ground beneath the feet. That ancient bodily truth has become a way to describe emotional, social, and spiritual danger. There is a lesser-known modern echo in our fascination with submerged archaeology. Sunken cities, drowned forests, ancient ports, lost shorelines, and underwater caves attract attention not only because they contain data, but because they reverse the old disappearance. They bring the hidden back into sight. When divers find stone tools beneath the sea or map a landscape under a bay, they are doing something deeply human, challenging water's power to conceal history. The same element that swallowed the evidence becomes the place where discovery now happens. Still, the old fear sharpens those discoveries. An underwater cave is scientifically valuable, but it is also claustrophobic and deadly. A submerged settlement is fascinating, partly because it asks us to imagine people living where fish now move. A drowned forest makes sea level rise visible in trunks and roots. These places remind us that deep water is not only a natural force but an archive of loss. It preserves and erases at once. For modern humans, the terror of deep water may be most intense because it contradicts the illusion of control. We are used to environments made for us: lit rooms, roads, screens, signs, railings, measured depths, marked beaches. Deep water ignores that arrangement. It returns us to an older condition, where the body must negotiate directly with cold, breath, darkness, and force. In that moment, the past is not gone. It is physiological. So the fear that early humans carried beside rivers, lakes, marshes, and coasts still moves through us, changed but recognizable. It appears in the hesitation before jumping from a boat, in the unease of swimming over unseen depth, in the caution around floodwater, in the silence that falls when someone looks into a black river at night. It is not merely superstition, it is the memory of limits, renewed each time the foot loses ground. Deep water taught early humans humility long before it taught them travel. It told them that intelligence does not cancel vulnerability, that tools do not abolish nature, that courage without attention is just another way to drown. Those lessons remain. The fear never left because the conditions that made it reasonable never fully disappeared. We still breathe air. We still see poorly below the surface. We still depend on ground. And somewhere beneath the polished confidence of the modern world, the ancient shoreline is still there, dark, reflective, and waiting. What deep water still hides is not only danger, but evidence. The oldest shorelines are often gone beneath modern seas, the camps where people learned tides, the paths where children were warned back from banks, the places where the first uncertain rafts pushed away from land, the shell beds, hearths, fish traps, and crossings that changed whole populations may lie under sediment, coral, mud, or moving sand. Archaeology is often forced to study the surviving edges of a vanished world and infer the missing centre. The evidence remains incomplete, and in this story, the incompleteness is not a minor problem. It is part of the mystery itself. For a long time, it was easier to imagine early humans as mostly inland creatures who occasionally approached water. The records seem to support that view, because caves, river terraces, and dry landscapes preserved more visible traces. But preservation is not the same as importance. If people used coasts heavily during periods of lower sea level, many of their sites are now offshore. If they built early rafts from reeds, wood, bark, or skins, those vessels have almost all vanished. If they taught fear through stories, gestures, taboos, and place names, those teachings are gone unless later traditions carry distant echoes. What survives in the record suggests activity. What does not survive may have carried much of the meaning. This is why submerged archaeology matters so much. Underwater landscapes can reveal old river channels, forests, stone tools, drowned caves, and traces of human occupation where land once stood. Each discovery widens the frame. It reminds us that the present coastline is not the ancient coastline, and that human history did not happen only on the dry ground we can easily walk today. The sea has covered chapters, but not necessarily destroyed all of them. Some pages remain sealed beneath silt, waiting for the right tools and the right questions. Yet even when evidence is found, fear itself must be reconstructed indirectly. A stone tool near an ancient shore does not say whether its maker feared the surf. Fish bones do not reveal whether children were forbidden from a pool. A rafter does not preserve the panic of its first failed crossing. Scholars still debate how to connect material traces with emotion, because emotion leaves few fossils, but fear can be approached through risk. If a place is dangerous, necessary, repeatedly used, and surrounded by evidence of adaptation, then fear is not an unreasonable inference. It is part of the human cost of using that place. The deep-water story is therefore not about cowardice. It is about negotiation. Early humans were terrified of deep water because they had good reasons to be bodies built for land, lungs bound to air, eyes weakened below the surface, predators hidden from sight, rivers that changed without warning, coasts that gave food and took lives, seas that swallowed landscapes. But they also returned because water offered what survival demanded: food, movement, shelter, separation, connection, new worlds. No single explanation fully accounts for how fear became skill. It likely happened many times, in many places, through accidents, experiments, losses, and remembered successes. A child learned not to step too close. A gatherer learned a tide, a hunter learned a crossing, a group learned a season, someone trusted a floating log, someone improved it, someone crossed and came back. That return changed everything. Deep water remains one of the great teachers in the human past because it never allowed easy mastery. It punished ignorance, but it rewarded attention. It hid danger, but it also hid roots. It erased evidence, but preserved mystery. It made humans feel small, and forced them to become more observant, more cooperative, and more inventive. The fear was real, and the courage was not the absence of it. The courage was the decision to stand at the edge, read the signs, remember the dead, and still consider the far shore. The story slows here, at the edge where it began, a dark surface, a watching group, a breath held longer than comfort allows. Across deep time, the scene changes in detail, but not in feeling. The riverbank becomes a coastline. The coastline becomes a drowned plane. The floating log becomes a raft, then a canoe, then a vessel capable of carrying memory across the horizon. But beneath every invention remains the same fragile body, warm and breathing, asking the water for permission to pass. Early humans were terrified of deep water because they understood, more directly than most modern people ever need to, that the world is not built for human certainty. The land can be difficult, but it answers the foot. Water answers differently. It shifts, hides, reflects, pulls, and keeps its own counsel. It gives food with one tide and danger with the next. It carries a group toward a new land, or carries away the evidence that they were ever there. And still, people went to it. They knelt to drink. They gathered shells. They watched birds over waves. They crossed rivers with children held high. They learned the shape of currents, the smell of storms, the sound of banks beginning to fail. They made fear useful, and in doing so, they made the human world larger. Somewhere under today's seas, there may still be old hearths buried in drowned valleys, tools resting where shorelines once shone in Ice Age light, traces of camps where people listened to surf that broke far beyond the beaches we know now. The water keeps those places quietly. It does not explain them. It does not return them easily. It lets them remain suspended between history and mystery. That may be the final reason deep water still holds us. It is not only dangerous, it is not only beautiful, it is a keeper of vanished edges, a mirror over lost ground, a moving darkness above human memory. At the shore, early humans saw fear, food, death, distance, and possibility all occupying the same surface. They saw the known world end, and beyond it, another world begin.